All right, today we're going to talk about constructing linear functions. So we're going to write linear functions from graphs, tables, and verbal descriptions by finding the rate of change. Remember, that's slope, or our m value, and our initial value, which is our y-intercept, or our b value, and we are going to use slope-intercept form. Which is y equals mx plus b. So we're going to use that equation. So a linear function is a function that is an equation in the form of y equals mx or y equals mx plus b. We talked about that in the last lesson. The graph of a linear function forms a straight line. So this idea is that we're always going to have a straight line. If for some reason you don't have a straight line, that means that something went wrong somewhere, okay? So the slope m of a linear function is known as the rate of change between 2 points in a linear relationship is the same or constant. So the b or the y-intercept of a linear function is also known as the initial value. The initial value is the corresponding y value when x equals 1. So we've talked about that x has to equal, or not equal 1, x equals 0. So when x equals 0, it's that idea that we're going to have some point that's going to be 0, b. Okay, so remember, slope is our change in y over our change in x. Okay, so it's going to end up looking like this. We've talked about this in the last section, so keep going. So now let's talk about, we're going to construct linear functions from graphs. You construct a linear function from a graph by determining the rate of change, or slope m, and initial value y, or y-intercept b when writing it in the form of y equals mx plus b. So we're going to find our rate of change. So the idea is, when we're going from this point 400 to 700, how are we going up? And then how are we going over? So in this specific case, if we're doing it from a graph, we've already talked about how to do this. We know that when we're finding slope, we're going to have our rise over our run, or how are we going up or down to how are we going right or left. We talked about this. So we're given $300 over 4 months. When we simplify that, we're going to get $75 over 1 month. We're going to find the initial value, which is our y-intercept. When we have x equals 0, our y value is going to be 100. So our initial cost is going to be $100. So when we plug it into our equation, we're going to have y equals 75x plus 100. Now let's look at our first example. A shoe store offers free points when you sign up for the rewards card. Then for each pair of shoes purchased, you earn an additional number of points. The graph shows the total points earned for several pairs of shoes. Find and interpret the rate of change and initial value. Then write the equation of the function in the form y equals mx plus b. Find and interpret the rate of change. Choose any 2 points from the graph. So remember how we also said our slope equals y1 minus y2 over x1 minus x2. And we can figure that out by labeling our points. Notice how they say use the points 260 and 490. Our 2, hold on. I clicked too many things. Okay, so our 2 is going to end up being our x1. Our 60 is our x, or our y2. So let's see, we have x1 or y1. Our 60 is y1. Then our next point is x2, y2, because that means that it's our second point. So what they ended up doing is they actually used the equation y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So they have their y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So 90 minus 60 over 4 minus 2. So we end up simplifying to get 15 over 1. So the rate of change is 15. That's our simplified slope. So that tells us that the number of points earned per pairs of shoes is 15. Next, the idea is when x equals 0. So let's look at this. When x equals 0, where are we at? We're going to be at 30. So y equals 30. So the initial number of points earned is 30. Write the equation in the form y equals mx plus b. So that tells us we're going to have y equals 15x plus 30. Next, let's try the check. Go ahead and pause the video. Now that you've tried the check, let's read the problem. A conference center charges an initial deposit plus an hourly fee for renting the space for an event or party. The total cost for different numbers of hours, including the deposit, is shown in the graph. All right, so we're going to look at our graph. We're going to pick 2 points, or we're going to figure out if we were to draw our triangle. We're going to go from 100 to 150. So we can either use our triangle or we can actually type out, because remember the rate of change is the first thing we want to find. Then we're going to find our initial value of b. So that tells us that we're going to go up by, if we go from 100 to 150, we're going up by 50. And then we're going over by, actually, we're going over by 3. So let's fix that. So instead of a 2 here, we should have a 3, because that's where our point is, 3, 150. And so that tells us that we're going over by 2. And so we're going to have our change in y, which is 50, over 2, which simplifies to 25 over 1. So our m equals a simplified number of 25. So that tells us that we just found our slope, and then if we interpret our slope, interpreting means what does that represent? What does it mean to say 25? It means it's going to cost $25 per hour because our y value is money and our x value is hours. So for $25, that's how much it costs for 1 hour. Now let's look at our initial value. So our initial value is when x equals 0. So we're going to figure out, okay, if x is 0, where are we at? What is in between? What's the middle of 50 and 100? In between 50 and 100, we're going to get 75. So that's why we get, when x equals 0, we get y equals 75. So the initial deposit is $75. Okay, this is our interpretation. Okay, part C is when we're writing our equation. So if it helps, we know that our m is going to be 25. We know the b is going to be 75. So now we just write our x and our plus sign, our equal sign, and our y. And that's an easy way to remember how to write the equation if you just write it right below the slope-intercept form. All right, let's go to the next. Let's see what happens if we have a table. So we've already kind of done this before. Not much is changing. So the idea is we're still using, for our slope, we're going to find our change in y over our change in x. Our b value is when we have 0 for our x value. So this is when x equals 0, y equals what? So let's look at our table. So our table doesn't give us when x is 0. So that's something we're going to have to figure out. But it does give us an easy way to find our change in y over our change in x. So if we go to 35 to 50, that means that we're going to end up with 15. 50 to 65 is still plus 15, and so forth. We're still going to get plus 15. Our change in x is going to be a plus 1. 2 to 3, plus 1. 3 to 4 is a plus 1. So that tells us we're going to have it over 1. If you wanted to use the equation, you're going to have 50 minus 35 over 2 minus 1. We are going to end up with 15. So you can still do it that way. So now we're actually going to find our initial value by plugging in. So this is where it's new. Okay, this is new. Use the slope-intercept form to find the y-intercept. So we're going to start with our slope-intercept form. So that's our first step. Second step, we're going to replace our m, so our slope, with 15. And then we're going to use a point. So we're going to use a point. This is our new step, okay? We're going to use a point. We're going to plug in our first point, so 135. We're going to plug in for x. We're going to plug in a 1. For y, we're going to plug in that 35. And notice how we have one variable left. And that variable that's left is going to tell us what our y-intercept is. So we're going to have to reach back into our brains and remember, oh, how do we simplify an equation for a variable? So first off, we're going to say 15 times 1. And then we need to get b by itself. So to get b by itself, we're going to subtract 15 from each side. And we're going to end up with, well, this cancels out. We bring down the b. And then 35 minus 15 gives us that 20. So now we know our y-intercept is 20. We can plug it in. Y equals 15x plus 20. Next, let's look at another example. So in this example, the table shows how much money Ava has saved. Assume the relationship between the two quantities is linear. Find and interpret the rate of change and initial value, then write the equation of the function in the form y equals mx plus b. So we have our slope and we have our y-intercept. We're going to do the same thing if we have 110. So we're looking at our first point and we're looking at our second point. 110, we get x1, y1, 4 over 130. This is x2, y2. They are using the equation of y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And when they do that, we're going to get 20 over 1, or just 20. So the rate of change is 20. When we interpret that, that means she is saving $20 each month. So the way to think about this is our y represents. So if our slope, we normally have our change in y over our change in x. Y represents our money saved. X represents our number of months. So when we're looking at how it's changing, we're looking at how much money was saved over how many number of months. So Ava saves $20 each month. Next, we're going to plug in that m into y equals mx plus b. And now we're going to take one of our points and we're going to plug our x and our y in. So we should have a 3 for the x, a 110 for the y. We're going to plug those in. And then we're going to simplify. So we have 110 equals 60 because 20 times 3 gives us 60. That's what's happening here. And then we're going to end up subtracting 60 from both sides. We're going to end up with a b on our right-hand side and a 50 on our left-hand side. So that tells us that Ava initially saved $50. Lastly, we're going to have y equals 20x plus 50 because we're plugging in our m and our b value. Go ahead and try this check. Now that you've tried the check, let's talk about it. The table shows the cost of a smartphone plan based on the data used per month. Assume the relationship between the two quantities is linear. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to find our rate of change. So to find the rate of change, we're going to look at slope equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. If you want to just write that in on here, we know 2 is going to be our x1, 3 is going to be our x2, 50 is y1, 65 is y2. That tells us that the equation we're going to use is 65 minus 50 over 2 minus, oops, I did that backwards. Don't flip it. Be careful, don't flip it. We want to do our x2 first, so that tells us we're going to do 3 minus our 2. That tells us we're going to get a 1. And then we're going to get a 15. So our slope equals 15. If we're trying to interpret it, we know our top value is our cost. Our bottom value is our number of gigabytes. Okay, I don't know how to write gigabytes as a abbreviation, so I'm just going to write it out. So we say gigabyte. So it's $15 for 1 gigabyte, or each gigabyte costs $15. Next, we're going to have to actually plug in. So we're going to start with y equals mx plus b. We're going to plug in our m. So we have y equals 15x plus b. Our b is what we're still confused about, but we can pick any points from our table. We can pick any point. We can pick 250, 365, 480, 595. Usually just pick the smallest one. So we're going to pick our 250. We're going to plug in 50 for y equals 15 times, well, 50 had a x of 2. So we're going to plug in 2 plus b, and then we have to solve for b. So we're going to end up with 15 times 2 gives us 30. We're going to rewrite everything else, subtract 30 from both sides. We're going to end up with 20 equals b. And that stands for, because b is our y value, so remember, we could rewrite this as 0, 20. Our y equals 20, and our y stands for what? Our y stands for cost. So we need to remember that that stands for cost. So that's our $20. So when they're saying a smartphone plan, the initial cost of a smartphone plan is $20. Then we're just going to plug that 20 in. So we're going to use what we started with here. And the only thing that's different is that we're going to plug in that 20 for our b value. Okay. Next, from verbal descriptions. So we're still going to use y equals mx plus b. We're still going to figure out what our rate of change is, what our initial value. We're just using words now. So we say a ski instructor charges an initial fee plus $30 per hour. So when we see the word per, we know that our slope is going to end up being $30. And it says that Tasha paid $205 for 6 hours of instruction. So it looks like we're given, so remember, time is usually our x value and our total cost is usually our y value. So we can think of, we're given our slope, we're given our x, we're given a y, but we don't know that initial fee. So this one's a little weird. We haven't done something like this before. So first, step number 1, we're going to find our initial rate of change, or our rate of change, and that's going to be our $30 per hour. So yep, we already talked about that. Next, we're going to find our initial value. So we're going to do what we did before. We're given our slope, we plug that in. Then we're going to plug in our 6 into x, our y into 205. And then we're going to simplify, and we should simplify and get a 25 for our initial cost, or our what do they call it? Initial fee. So we get $25 for the initial fee. Our equation is y equals 30x plus 25. All right, let's look at another example. So it looks like Joan plans to add 12 photos to her photo album each week. So we're going to add 12 photos each week. After 8 weeks, so we have 8 weeks, there's 120 photos in the album. So we're going to assume the relationship is linear. So it says, find and interpret the rate of change. That's our part A. So Joan adds 12 photos to her photo album each week. So think of this as, I'm going to add 12 photos per week, right? That would be our slope. So the way we're going to say this is, we're going to have 12 photos per week. So our slope is 12. The rate of change is 12. Again, we're going to plug that slope into our equation. We're going to plug in the 8 weeks. So time is usually x. So that's why 8 is our x value. And then our total number of photos is going to be our y value. We're going to simplify. So we should put a 96 in this box. And we're going to get a total or our initial number of photos to be 24. So 24 is our initial value. Our equation to represent this situation is going to be y equals 12x plus 24. All right, next, we're going to do a check. So let's look. Julie is tracking the growth of a plant for a science project. The height of the plant on the second day, so it looks like we're starting out with the second day. That's what they're talking about. And it measures 8 inches. So we can think of that as, well, the second day is 8 inches. Our x value is 2. Our y value is 8. That's going to be a point on our graph. Then they tell us on the 7th day, it's going to be 20.5 inches. So we're going to have another point. We're looking at the 7th day. It's going to be 20.5. This is our x. This is our y. The way we want to think about this, x1, y1, x2, y2. Don't forget, you're going to use m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So you're going to use that equation, and then we're going to plug that slope into y equals mx plus b and figure out what the initial size of her plant was. And we're going to figure that out. So go ahead and do that. Pause the video. Now that you've tried that, let's look at our answers. So here are the answers. Let's talk about it. So the rate of change is 2.5. Meaning the plant grows 2.5 inches per day. So if we plug our points in, we're going to have our slope equals 20.5 minus 8 over 7 minus 2. This is what your equation should look like. When you've done this equation, you plug it into your calculator, you're going to end up getting, let's see, 2.5 or 20.5 minus 8 means we get 12.5 over 7 minus 2 gives us 5. When we simplify this, we're going to plug that into our calculator. We're going to get our slope equals 2.5. Then we're going to plug that into y equals mx plus b. Instead of m, we're going to plug in our 2.5, x plus b. Pick a point. Let's pick the first one. We're going to say 8 equals 2.5 times 2 plus b. We're going to simplify that. 2.5 times 2 gives us 5 equals 8 plus b. Subtract 5. That's going to end up giving us 3 equals b. So our initial value is 3, meaning the plant was initially 3 inches. Plug it all into y equals mx plus b. We plug in our m, which is 2.5. We plug in our b, which is 3. So we get y equals 2.5 plus 3. All right, we're almost done. We need to apply what we just learned. So Rosa wants to buy a motor scooter. The graph shows information about 2 different scooters, assuming the pattern continues. What will be the difference in values of the 2 scooters when they are each 8 years old? So let's see. What does that mean? Let's look at this. So we have our x value, which is just our age in years. We have our total value of the scooter, and we're trying to figure out what will be the difference in values of the 2 scooters when they are 8 years old. So we have 2 different graphs. This one's new. Let's figure this out. So we're looking at our graph. We need to actually figure out 2 different equations. So it looks like we have something called a jet rider and a BX10. So we have, let's make the red one. This one's going to be our jet rider. And then I'm just going to say BX for BX10. So we have 2 graphs. So let's look at this first one. Let's look at this one. Let's see if we can figure out our slope. So if we're going down, so notice how both of our graphs are negative. If we go down, this one doesn't really have tick marks. So maybe we want to start with this point and this point right here. maybe we want to make our triangle, because those are pretty numbers, it looks like. So our second point, so let's see, for our jet, we have two different points. First one I'm going to say is 400. Another point is going to be when he was 3, it cost 640. So there's our jet writer. So we have 2 points for that. We're going to figure that out. Let's do the next one. The next one's blue. So let's draw this in blue. So we have this point right here, which is going to end up being 5 and then 480. So we have 5, 480. Then our other one, it looks like they both intersect at this point. So I'm going to use that point as well. So we have 3, 640. All right. We have 2 points for each bike, meaning we can figure out our slope. That's all we need to figure out our slope. So let's do that. So I'm going to do jet first. So let's look at jet. Slope equals, so we're going to start out with our y2, 400, minus y1, 640, over y2, or x2, which is 5, minus yx1, which is 3. And what do we end up getting? So go ahead and get your calculators out. This is going to help you. So let's do 400 minus 640 equals 240. So 240 over 5 minus 3 is 2. So when we simplify that, we take our 240, divide by 2, equals 120. Don't forget, this is going to be negative, so this is going to be negative. That means our slope is a negative value. It should be negative. Our graph is negative. So it looks like our slope for the first one is going to be, we're decreasing. So we're decreasing by $120 per year. Okay, there's our first one. So let's do the next one. So the next one, it's blue. I'm going to write it on the side. Or actually, we should have some room down here. So slope equals, we're going to have our 480 minus 640 all over 5 minus 3, which gives us, let's see, use your calculators. Definitely, we know the bottom's 2. We know the change in x is 2. And then let's do our change in y. So 480 minus 640 gives us 160. And we're going to simplify that. So divide that by 2. We should get, oh, don't forget that's a negative. And we have a negative 80. So our slope for bx is going to end up being negative 80. But that means that we're going to decrease by $80 per year. And what was the question asking us to do? It said, assuming the pattern continues, what will the difference in values of the 2 scooters be when they are each 8 years old? So now that we found our slopes, so we have m equals negative 80. I forgot to say up here that m equals negative 120. Now we have to take that a step further, plug each of those into y equals mx plus b, and figure out when each kid is 8 years old, how much are each of the scooters going to be worth? So let's see. So we're already given the answer. It's 200. Let's figure out how they got 200. So first off, we're going to start out with red. Our first bike, the jet, we're going to start out with y equals mx plus b. We're going to plug in our n value, which was negative 120. And we're going to plug in our x and our y value. So we're going to pick, let's just pick our 640. So 640. We're going to use that point for both of them. Okay. And we're going to figure out our y-intercept. So we have 640 equals negative 120 times 3 plus b. And we're going to do the same thing. Let's do both of them at the same time. So we have y equals mx plus b. We start with y equals negative 80 times x plus b. So we're going to have our 640 equals negative 80 times 3 plus b, because we need to figure out the equation in order to figure out how much it's going to cost after 8 years. So let's simplify both equations. So I'm going to go back to my jet. So we have 120 times 3. Use your handy dandy calculators. 120 times 3. Don't forget it's a negative. So that's going to equal negative 360 plus b. Rewrite everything else. If we have a negative, we're going to add 360 to both sides. Whoop. When we do that, these cancel. We end up with a b. So we're going to have, let's see, 6 and 4 is 10. So we have 3. This was 6. So we're going to have 0, 0, 0, 1, right? 640 plus 360 is 1,000. So that's going to be our first equation. So for the jet, we're going to have y equals negative 120 x plus 1,000, because 1,000 is going to be the initial cost for the x, for the jet. Now let's look at the bx. So let's look at blue bx. So we have negative 80 times 3. So we get 240. Don't forget that's a negative, plus b equals 640. We're going to add 240 to each side. These cancel. 0, 8, 6, 7, 8 equals our initial value. So the other one is going to be y equals negative 80 x plus 880. So now we can see how much did each bike initially cost. We can say how much it's depreciating each year. And so what we're going to do is now we need to figure out, when both of them are 8, what is the cost of each bike, and I think we have to figure out the difference. Yep, we're trying to figure out what will the difference in values be of the two scooters when they're both 8. So what that means, our next step is we're going to have to plug in when x equals 8 years, right? We have to figure out when x equals 8 years. So we're going to have our y equals negative 120 times x plus 1,000. And so that means we're going to plug in that 8 for that x value. So we get 120 times 8. Don't forget that's a negative 120, so it's a negative 960 plus 1,000. And then when we add those together, we're going to get 40. So our y value equals 40, and our y stands for our total cost. So it's going to be $40 for the first bike. Now let's look at the second one. So we have y equals negative 80 times x plus 880. So we're going to plug in that 8 for the x. We're going to have y equals negative 80 times 8 should be negative 640 plus a positive 880. We're going to subtract those. We want to find the difference. So we have 880 minus 640 gives us 240. And then we have to subtract those. We're going to say 40 or 240 minus 40. That's how they got their 200 as their difference. All right. Whew, that was a lot of steps. Basically, we're just adding. We're doing it twice, what we just learned. And then we're finding the difference once we get those equations of how much it's going to be after 8 years. So go ahead and try this. Check. Pause the video. All right, now that you've tried the check, I know it's a lot of steps. Let's talk about it. Jack and Ryan save money at the rates shown in the graph. How much more money will Ryan have saved after 20 weeks? So notice how weeks is our x value. So I want you to know that we're going to end up figuring out when x equals 20, y equals something. We are using y equals mx plus b. We're also using that m is our y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So we need to figure out 2 points from each graph. So we have Jack, we have Ryan. So let's talk about that. Let's make Ryan red. We're gonna make Jack blue, because why not? So let's see, we have a little bit of space here. I'm gonna use the space to the side because that's really gonna help us out. So first, let's look at Ryan. Okay, so let's look at Ryan. Let's look at our 2 points on a graph for Ryan. So we have 1 point here and we have 1 point here. We could figure out our slope by using a triangle. Let's use our equation because sometimes we're not going to be able to do that. So let's figure out, Ryan has 2 points. So in 1 week, he saved $40. So we have 140. And then it tells us in 2 weeks, he saved 70. So if we were to do our equation, we're going to have 70 minus 40 over 2 minus 1. That's going to end up being 30 over 1. So he's saving $30 per week. Okay, because week stands for our x, and that's our amount saved. So now we're going to figure out our equation. So y equals mx plus b. We know our m value, so we have y equals 30x plus b. We're going to plug in one of our equations. Let's pick the first one. So we're going to have 40 for y. We're going to have 30 times 1 plus b, because I'm going to use the smallest numbers possible, because why would we want to use big numbers? So we get 30 times 1, which is 30. Rewrite everything else. Subtract 30 because we have a positive 30. Don't forget, because we are trying to get 30 to the other side. We're trying to get b by itself. These cancel. We get 10 equals b. So now our equation is going to be y equals 30x plus 10. So here's Ryan. Whew. All right, we got to find Jack. Let's look at Jack. So we're going to do the same thing for Jack. So now, let's see. Jack, let's see. This one's an easy one. So we're going to have, for Jack, we're going to have 2 and 50. And then for Jack, it looks like there's a point right here. I don't want to guess it, so I'm going to pick this point up here. So in 4 weeks, he saved $80. Whew. All right, let's figure out our slope. So our slope is going to end up being 80 minus 50 over 4 minus 2. So that equals 30 over 2, which gives us 15. So he's saving $15 per week. So that tells us we're going to have y equals 15x plus b. Let me make that look pretty. 15x plus b. And so we're going to pick one of our points. I'm going to pick my 2 and my 50. So let's say 50 equals 15 times 2 plus b. That means we get 30 equals 50 plus b. We're going to write minus 30. So those cancel. We're going to end up with 20 equals b. So our equation for Jack is going to end up being y equals, we're going to write 15x plus 20. And now we can write Ryan, which is y equals 30x plus 10. And now we need to figure out when x equals 20. So we're going to plug that in. So for Jack, we have y equals 15 times 20 plus 20. For Ryan, we're going to have y equals 30 times 20 plus 10. And we're going to simplify those. So we're going to end up with y equals, and I'm just going to plug it all into my calculator because I don't feel like doing a lot of math. So we're going to do 15 times 20, which is 300, plus 20, which is 320. There we go. That's going to be 290. Okay. So sometimes we want to make sure our handwriting looks good so that we don't make silly mistakes. I made it all the way at the end. So there is a lot of options to make mistakes. So please be careful, double check your work, plug things in, make sure they look right, check your answers, ask questions. All right? Go ahead and try the homework.